Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Bloom the Podcast. That's right, we are back, baby, live and ready to go. We have a super fun episode today. I know you can see we've got a laptop out, we've got coffee out, we are locked and loaded, ready for a awesome episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I know the episodes are a little bit more spaced out than regular. Again, sorry about that, but life is crazy. So just trying to catch up and, record when I can and, interact with you guys as much as possible. If you guys aren't following me on Instagram and or the Bloom page on Instagram, make sure that you guys do that because this video kind of ties into some of the polls, excuse me, some of the polls that we did on the Bloom page. I was asking some just general random questions to see where you guys were at on certain topics. And today we have a fun one. If you missed the last episode, the comeback episode of Bloom the Podcast, I kind of just went over a brief little synopsis of where I've been over the past, 9-10 months since I had recorded my last episode. Longer break than I wanted, but as if you guys watched that episode, life was kind of crazy. So glad to be back, glad to be recording second comeback episode of season 3. Hope you guys are enjoying everything so far. But today we have a fun episode. Also, shout out to my wife for letting me use her laptop. I don't have a laptop, which is kind of a shame. I need to get one so that way I can do these types of videos more often with you guys. But shout out to her for letting me use the laptop, and she also made me some coffee this morning, so I'm nice and energized for y'all. But today's episode, we're going to be talking about dating a little bit. We're going to be talking about differences in men and women a little bit. I saw a trend going on my YouTube a couple weeks ago, and it was these videos titled stuff like questions girls are too afraid to ask guys, or questions that guys are too afraid to ask girls. And I was like, oh, this should be interesting. We love talking about that kind of stuff over here. So I was watching these episodes and I was watching these videos from different channels, and I was noticing some themes between them. There was definitely some recurring questions. There were some, I don't want to say dishonesty. I think people answer these questions in the best way that they know how. I don't think it's like intentional dishonesty. I think there's just a little bit also of naivete involved in some of the answering of these questions. If you guys have followed Bloom the Podcast for any amount of time, or you know me in person at all, you know that there isn't a lot of, how should I say, like candy coating around stuff like this. I think a lot of that comes from growing up in the family that I grew up in. My parents did not necessarily, sugarcoat the differences between men and women and the things that make us different and the way that reality is in between the two sexes. And I think that was very helpful. But I think it also gave me a lens in which I view videos like this a little bit differently. So today we're going to be reacting to one of the videos that I saw that had some good questions on it, and I wanted to give my input. It is a video by the title of or questions that girls are too afraid to ask guys. I'm going to be linking the full video in the description so you guys can watch the whole thing. I'm not going to be going over all the questions. I think some of them are a little goofy, some of them are a little silly, and even some of the ones that I'm going to answer today are a little bit silly. But I think they're worth touching on. And I want to preface it by saying no hate, no shade on this couple. I think they did a good job on answering a lot of these questions. Again, I think there's a little bit of naivete on some of them. As just misunderstandings or just like fundamental differences that are not necessarily acknowledged. I think there's also a lot of subtext that you see that is not even really a conscious thing. I think it's stuff that you grow up seeing, you grow up hearing, and it shapes the way that you see relationships between men and women without you even really realizing it. And it's kind of just there in your face. And I wanted to highlight a couple of those moments here because I think it's important that people understand where some of the logic breaks down that they're using to answer some of these questions. And I think you see a lot of blank slate equalism in these types of videos as well. When you're answering questions as a guy, a lot of times the immediate default is to say either, well, yeah, it's the same like this for women, and vice versa. If you're answering a question like this for women, you're saying, oh, yeah, it's the same like this for guys. And I think there's a real desperate desire on humanity's part to have everything be equal and everything be the same for guys and for girls. And I think that that gets us into a lot of trouble when it comes to answering questions that we're going to be answering today honestly. Because the truth of the matter is, and this is one of the questions on the poll was, are men and women more alike or are they more different? And if you were to ask me, I think everything points to men and women being more different than they are alike. Even though we're both humans, I think just the biology, the psychology, the physiology, all of that stuff is very opposite of each other. So I think pushing blank slate equalism aside is going to be very important for answering these types of questions honestly. And if girls are really scared to ask these questions, I think it's important to answer them honestly, to give them what they're asking for. Which kind of brings me to my other point before I start is I think there is a unwillingness to maybe say some of the hard stuff when it comes to these questions. And that makes me ask the question is, do people that ask these questions genuinely want to know the truth to these answers or to these questions? Because some of the answers are not very flattering for men or for women. And I think a lot of times when we ask these questions, there is a want to understand and to know the other side. But I think there's also a little bit of like ignorance is bliss and not knowing is almost better. Like it's one of those situations of like, would you rather be happy or would you rather be right kind of thing? Because I think once you kind of uncover some of the background stuff that happens in like intersexual dynamic between men and women, it kind of removes some of the appeal and the romanticism and the idealism behind a lot of this stuff that we get trapped in, especially as Americans and Western culture. There's a lot of push up in the romanticism and idealism and all this stuff, and it overlooks a lot of the realities that are actually at play here. So I'm going to try and highlight some of that for you. And again, I'm not gonna claim here, and he also does this as well, he doesn't claim to be answering for every guy that exists on the planet, because there are going to be exceptions to every rule. However, I've said this before and I'll say it again, we cannot make every video as the 10th dentist. We've got to represent the 9, and I think today we're going to try and represent as much of the 9 as possible. We'll still acknowledge the 10 here and there when it's applicable, but I think more or less there is just a way that life is when it comes to these things. There is a thought process, there is biological mechanisms at play that don't lend to a lot of variance. So we're going to try and answer these questions as best as we can. I'm not going to claim to answer for everyone, but I will claim to answer for a majority, because I feel like it's mostly standard stuff that we're talking about here. So yeah, we'll see how we fare. We're kind of going to jump straight into it. Again, the full video will be in the description, so if you want to watch the whole thing, go ahead, knock yourself out. These guys are fun. They do a good job of making the video entertaining and answering the questions in a fun way, so shout out to them for making a fun video for us to react to. So we're going to jump straight in. The first question here, and this is, why do guys ghost or not respond to text messages? So we'll get started here.
Why do guys not respond to text and ghost us? And I feel like you know the answer because you talk about this.
Well, I think the short answer is because most guys are lame. And
Okay. Sorry, I have to stop it here just because I think this is it's an interesting. You know what? I'm gonna let them keep going just for a second.
they don't respect women in general, or just people. I just feel like it's generally disrespectful not to respond to anybody's text or phone calls. But yeah, I feel like there's this thing where, if a guy, I think it could go both ways, guys and girls, but there's this thing that if guys feel like a girl's too interested in them, I'm not speaking on behalf of me, but I think most men, if they feel like the girl's too interested in them, they just like won't respond.
So the first reason why I kept this, and I'm gonna highlight this a couple different times in this podcast episode, is because there is always an ability and a willingness and an okayness to slam men on a large scale. His first default answer to this question is because most men suck. I think just by the law of averages, we know that that's not true, especially if we're talking about in a Christian context. We're assuming that these guys are Christian guys that we're talking about here. This is my assumption, but even if we were expanding that out into regular secular world, his answer to this question is because most guys suck. Which, if we were to reverse the question, if we were to say, why do girls ghost guys? Which, if you were to ask me, that happens way more than the opposite, just in the nature of men pursuing and women being the people that are saying yes and no. Women are typically going to be the first people to not reply to a text message, to send a message saying that they're not interested. So if we were to reverse the question and say, well, why do women not answer texts? And the default response would be, well, it's because women suck. You would get ran up the flagpole so quickly, and that just would not be an acceptable answer. So again, I'm going to highlight that type of mentality as we go throughout this video. But I think there is just a large just okayness with slamming men on a large scale without really even thinking about it. There was zero hesitation in him defaulting to a men are bad type of thing. And I think a lot of that again, the subtext of feminism in our culture makes us very okay with saying stuff like this, where the opposite is not okay. He then follows it up by saying that another large reason why this happens is because if a girl is seeming too interested in a guy, it makes him disinterested, which there's a couple things on that I disagree with. I think one would be that is a far and few between problem where the girl is too interested that it is a turnoff for the guy. That hardly ever happens anyway. I think the general experience is that most guys ask out a handful of people before they even receive a yes to go on a date. That's just the nature of how the game goes. So for a guy to say that most guys ghost girls because the girl is too interested, I think is an extreme overinflation of girls' general interest in guys back, generally speaking. And kind of going back to my first point, when he was talking about men suck, and I was saying that girls typically ghost more than guys, that's true just on the nature of how many guys ask girls out on a regular basis. Most girls get pursued more than most guys. So most girls are saying no to most guys, which would infer that most guys do not have girls that are overly interested in them. If you ask most girls if they've said yes to more guys or no to more guys, the majority answer is going to be they said no to more guys than they've said yes to. So this is a weird, I think, a weird front for the actual answer, which his wife gives shortly after, which I think is funny because this is more or less the truth, and we'll let her answer here.
Also, well, what I thought you were going to say, even though this isn't for me, but what I thought you were going to say is if they're not responding to you, they're just not interested. You preach that all the time.
And there it is. If they're not responding, they're not interested. I don't know a guy on the face of the planet that I've ever met that ghosts girls that he's actually interested in. That's just not how it works. If the guy likes you and you're showing signs of interest back, I feel like you'd be hard pressed to find a guy that wouldn't engage with you on some level if you're showing interest back. So I think she hits it right on the head here. If a guy is ghosting you, that's more or less to do with his interest in you as a whole rather than you being too interested, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's a fairly easy one to answer. Like I said, I kept that one in here for a couple reasons. And they actually have one more thing that I wanted to touch on this question before we go to the next one.
Yeah, well,
he always says like you should have to force something, and if you're like forcing and trying so hard, then maybe it's just not meant to be.
I do think that's true. Like in the long haul, a guy will let you know if they're interested in you. Immediately, they might try to play it cool and like not respond to your text. I just think that's lame. And if I were a girl, I wouldn't want to date a guy that was playing those games. And that's one of the reasons I like Sutton so much is because she didn't play any of those games. It was just
they make a good point here. There are some of the texting and phone call and contact games that get played to like not look desperate or to like seem cool or to seem that you have a lot of interest. That does happen quite often, actually. So there is a level of people trying to play the game, as they quote. I think it's important, and they mentioned here that finding people that aren't playing those. In the McReynolds household, we call those baby games. So my dad always calls them. And that's just what it is. If you're trying to seem uninterested to generate interest, I'm not going to be more interested. You're only making me less interested by pretending like you're too busy to text. If you're too busy to text, so am I. And then I'm on to the next. So, I mean, obviously I'm married now, so it doesn't apply. But when I was dating Sarah, if we were running into the issue of her not responding to me and her always putting me on ice to try and seem cool and uninterested, I mean, that's just not going to work. So yeah, I think it's funny. She hit it right on the head though. In general for this question, if a guy is not answering you, it is because he is uninterested, not because you are too interested in him. So hopefully that clears that up. We'll jump to the next one.
Does the size of body parts matter?
not in general. Like it might matter to specific people. Like, you know, I'm sure there's some guys who are like, I want this size on this girl. And that's what they're looking for. But generally speaking, I don't think it's going to like, you know, there's a guy out there for every size. That's what I'm saying.
So does size of body parts matter is, I think, it's an interesting question, but I also think it doesn't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things. I think he answers it more or less truthfully here. Like, generally speaking, no. I think in today's climate, you have a lot of people that think that people like Kim Kardashian have the ideal body type, which is the biggest lie I've ever seen. Nobody really likes that much. That's fake. And I think with stuff like Instagram and you have stuff like pornography and you have all these things that promote these outrageous looking body types, when in actuality regular people, regular guys would prefer a regular looking person. I think obviously someone who's in shape and someone who is proportional is important. I think that's an important thing for physical attraction. So in the large scheme, I don't think the actual size matters that much. And he kind of points it out, kind of referring to more of the exception to the rule, that there are going to be some people that are super strict on certain things for some particular reason. I think a lot of that is not held to very strongly, though. Like if one of these quote unquote guys that has a super strong preference for a particular body size part comes into contact with a girl that's pretty, that likes him and he likes her, more likely than not, that's not something that guys hold to as like a super strong standard. and are more than willing to throw that out for a girl that they meet that they like, especially if we're talking about in the church context, which I think we have to continually bring this back in if we're talking about Christian guys. I assume their audience is majority Christian just based off the nature of their content. So bringing that lens back in, if we're going to say there's a bunch of these Christian men that are filtering girls out purely based on size of body parts, I think that would be a big concern. that would be very concerning. On the flip side of this question, he answers with a very American romantic ideal answer after, to say there's a guy for every size. And again, I may catch some flack for this, but I don't think that that's true. I think in an ideal world, sure, yeah, there's a guy for every person and there's a girl for every guy and yada yada. But in reality, that's not true. That's not true. I mean, there's going to be obviously people that have a wider range of body types that they think are more attractive than other people. But I think in general, most guys are not going to go for someone that is not more or less in shape or, attractive to them. And a big part of attraction falls in that category. So I think for them to say, oh, don't worry though, there's a guy for every size, is completely unhelpful to anyone listening to this, to say, well, whatever size you're at now, that's totally fine. Just do that because there's a guy out there for that. That's not true. That's not helpful. And the Lord may bring someone to you that doesn't care about that, and whoop-de-doo, that's great. Good for you. However, for the masses listening to this, that's not helpful advice. And I don't think that that's true. So to say there's a guy for every size is, I think, largely unhelpful. And again, I don't think they're doing this intentionally to be unhelpful. I think this is more of a want to not necessarily offend or to discourage people. But I think people need more encouragement to do things that are going to benefit them rather than comforting lies to keep them from being hurt. Because if someone's asking this because they feel like they're out of shape or they're overweight and they're wondering if guys care about that, the answer to that question would be yes, guys do care about that. But that doesn't mean that you're a bad person or whatever, but it also means that there are things that you could do to make yourself more attractive in that way, where more people would find you attractive. It would increase your chances of having a guy that's interested in you. Is that shallow to say? No, I don't think so. I think it goes the exact same way on the other side. And I think it's more on the other side for girls than it is for guys. Guys have way less standards for physical attractiveness than girls do. And people say that, often disagree with me on that. But I think the size or weight and height are one of those two things that are always thrown around in these contexts. You can change your weight. You cannot change your height. So I know more girls that are staunch upon a height standard than I know guys that are staunch upon a weight standard. So even just taking that kind of small example, going back and forth, I think girls have stricter standards on attractiveness than men do. But again, I think doing the most you can to better yourself, because again, it's not just to look better that you would want to be in good shape. It's to be healthy. It's to treat your body like a temple, as they say. It's to be healthy. There's a wide array of benefits for being in shape. One of them being, though, that you will be more attractive to people if you are looking to be in a relationship. Which, if it's shallow to say that you want to be attractive to the person that, you like, then, pin it on me. I'm shallow. If that's how it's going to be, then I'm okay with that. But I think more or less that is kind of where we're at here. So we'll jump to the next one.
Why do you think guys are afraid of commitment?
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I do think most men are more afraid of commitment than most women are. It seems like a lot of women are just like, let's get married now. And the guys are like, whoa, this is crazy. And I know as much, even as certain as I was about Sutton, I still felt like going into marriage, I was like, wow, this is crazy. Like, I just can't believe we're doing this. But then once we got married, it was like, oh, this is no big deal. Like, this is great.
Okay, I'm going to take what he said first. He says in general, okay, the question being, why are guys scared of commitment? Which assumes the point that they are, if we're going to jump straight to that. It assumes that most guys are scared of commitment. That's not true. A guy that likes you and actually genuinely likes you is going to commit to you and is going to do what it takes to be in a relationship with you. And this is one thing my dad would always tell us when we were young is you don't have to tell a guy to buy a girl flowers that he likes. And the gist behind that meaning you don't have to tell a guy to do things for a girl that he likes. You don't have to tell a guy to, ensure that he has a good job to be able to provide for a girl he likes. You don't have to tell a guy to go buy a ring to propose to a girl that he likes. Those things happen from an outflow of desire for that person. So kind of going back to the first question they asked, if a guy likes you, he will interact. He will go that extra mile for the girl that he likes. So there is a bit of an indictment on this question to say, are guys scared to commit? I think the question would be at that point, does he actually like you? And I think obviously, again, there's going to be some variance there of guys that are genuinely concerned about it or whatever, but you have to ask the question, where is that concern coming from? Where is that concern coming from? Is it coming from the fact that he actually doesn't really like you that much and he's scared to commit because he, would be making a mistake at that point? You have a genuine concern, and I think there's some stuff that you would need to address, but I think you have to start asking that question. Why are you concerned? And she's going to touch on it a little bit here, so I'll let her continue on, and then I'll kind of give another response here. But I think we have to start asking some more questions.
I think it's because for some of them, they have it in their mind and they can't get it out of like, what if something better? What if someone better comes along? What if I like someone more? And like they can't get away from that. So they're like scared to commit because once they commit, that little what if is going to go away. Like there is no one else anymore. That's my guess.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people deal with that.
So she says the question or the answer to this is, because guys are saying, what if someone better comes along? What if, what if there's someone that I like more than this person? And I think ultimately that comes back to the original question, because I think that is an initial starting point for a lot of people. Like when you're talking to people and you're asking people out and you're like, well, this person said yes, but what if this person over here or this person over there is really pretty or whatever. I think though, if a guy genuinely likes you and he asks you out, a lot of times he's not seeing other girls like that anymore. Like that starts to fade really quickly. Like when I asked Sarah out and we started dating, we had so much fun and we were having such great conversation and we were connecting on such a deep level. All the other people that I would have been interested in or that are around me or that are in your social group, you don't see them the same way anymore. Like especially once we became boyfriend and girlfriend, all that stuff goes out the window. So again, it comes back to that original question. If the guy you're with, I'm talking mainly to the person asking the question to them. If the guy that you're with is asking that question of what if there's someone else out there, or what if there's something else that I can do? Generally speaking, I think that's going to speak more to his interest in you as a whole rather than why are guys scared to commit? Because if we're being truthful, guys commit to a lot in relationships. If you look at the charges for men in the Bible of what men are called to do, there's a lot there. And I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of things that women are called to do as well. But if you're looking at what men are committing to from a biblical standpoint, you're asking for literal death, giving up of your life for this individual. So there's a lot here that a guy is committing to if you're looking biblically. So to ask that question, you really have to get down to how much is this person genuinely interested in me? And I think that's going to be where we need to let that be. But yeah, we'll jump to the next one and we'll see where we go from here.
Does what girls wear matter?
Yes, I think so.
Elaborate.
I think what you wear really tells a lot about you as a person and what you think of yourself and how you want to portray yourself to the world. I think if you dress slutty, you're going to attract the kind of guys that are into those kind of girls. And if you...
I've never heard you say that word.
Oh, really? And if you dress more conservatively, and I think it's going to portray to men that you care about yourself, you care about your body, and you're not just laying it out all out there for everyone for who wants to take it.
So, question being, does it matter what women wear? And this is mainly referring to modesty as he answers this question. I think it 100% does matter what you wear. I think what he says is correct. What you wear says a lot about you. I think he mainly is approaching it from the immodesty category, which I do agree. If you're someone who wears a lot of revealing clothes and a lot of immodest clothing, I think that would indicate a lot to a guy of what type of attention it is that you're looking for. I think in a general sense, people all want to be desired in the same way. Like, I think a person who dresses modestly still wants to have someone that finds them attractive, and vice versa. The person dressing immodestly wants to have someone that finds them attractive. They're going about getting that in different ways, but I think both people want the same thing. So if you can find someone who dresses modestly and goes about that in a biblical way, I think that that is a big green flag in that person. I also think there are two types of immodesty that we can talk about here. There is the obvious type of immodesty where it is, wearing revealing clothing and, trying to seek that kind of attention. But I think there's also on the other side, there is the people that, dress so crazy and dress in the biggest outfits ever to try and be quote unquote modest, that they're drawing just the same amount of attention to themselves. And it's a prideful type of fake humility of, oh, I'm being modest. And it's like, not really. You just kind of look goofy. And I think that is a big thing as well, which kind of ties back into the question, because I think a lot of people assume that if you're dressing modestly, you can't dress nice, which is a huge just misnomer in general. And then I think also people assume that if you're dressing modestly, that guys won't find you attractive in the same way, which there is a little bit of truth in that, in the sense of the guy's not going to be staring at your body that you're showing. So that would be different. But I also think that if you're an attractive person, the guy's going to find you attractive regardless. And especially if you're dressing modestly, that should amplify said attraction for you. And I think that goes even to the far extreme, which kind of makes me think of a funny McReynolds households, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess system of attractiveness. This is one thing that we always talk about when we're talking with people about attractiveness, especially when it comes to modesty. And it's called the bonnet theory. So we were having a conversation one day, as we do, about stuff like this. And my sister was talking about, well, if a girl wore a bonnet, no guy would like her. And every guy in my family adamantly disagreed with that, because, again, if you are attractive, there's that threshold there where if you are attractive to that guy and you're in his range of attractiveness, you could be wearing a bonnet, you could be wearing whatever, he's still going to find you attractive. Is it the most optimal thing to wear? No, but there is that level of attractiveness that you could wear a bonnet and the guy would still like you. So I think you have to kind of push past the initial presuppositions of dressing modestly, because I think when you think of modesty, that's this type of stuff that you think of. It's like, oh, I'm wearing a bonnet and a huge, crazy, dress, and it's just flowy, and I look like a 12-year-old boy and all this stuff. And it's like, no, that doesn't mean that. So you can be perfectly attractive in wearing modest clothing, and guys will still find you attractive. And again, bringing this back in, if we're talking about Christian men in the church, this should be a huge green flag. So yes, it does matter. It matters a lot. Okay, I think we're going to do one more, and then we're going to save the rest for a part 2. So we're going to jump down to a kind of recurring question here, and then we'll leave it there. So I hope you guys have been enjoying so far. Let's answer this last one before we get out of here.
Think about girls asking them on a date or initiating the conversation with them.
Yeah, I think for the most part, you should try to be the one that's being initiated. I think most men like that, you know. I think it's probably a turnoff for most men if you are the one initiating. But at the same time, like if he's never making any moves and nothing's ever going to happen, you're probably better off trying to initiate something than letting it never, or, you know, nothing ever happening.
Okay. So this ties a little bit back into the first question that we answered, but on a different note. Question being, is it a turnoff if girls ask guys out? No, it's not a turnoff. I think it's so crazy. I think there's this weird notion, and I think a lot of it, again, subtext of feminism here. But for girls to ask guys out, this kind of puts guys, they assume that this is putting guys in this weird feminine position where they're being initiated against, and it's like, oh, you know, now I feel less manly and this girl's asking me out, blah blah blah. Not true. If a girl asks you out, I feel like that is a huge flattering moment for a guy. Like, every girl that I know has stories of guys asking them out and it being super awkward and super creepy, and they have all these stories that they can recite. Guys usually only get stories like that, like every once in a blue moon, and they remember all of them. So for a girl to ask a guy out is so outside of the norm that especially if it's a girl that you find attractive and that you would be interested in, if she asks a guy out, he's going for it. So I think this is definitely a weird position that he's taking, and maybe this is how he feels about it. But for the generality of men out there, I think it's not a turnoff. I think how you do it is important. If you do it in a masculine way, I think it can be a little odd. I think most guys would still go for it. But I think there are plenty of ways to do this tactfully where the guy would not be turned off in any way and would be happy to go out. And I think he brings up a point here that we can address, but I've talked to friends in the past where they'll be like, oh, I like this guy, but he hasn't asked me out yet. And then I'll say back to them, like, well, does he know you exist? Like, have you guys ever talked? Is there any rapport there? Is there a reason for him to have asked you out already? And more often than not, the answer is no. So it's like, if the guy doesn't know who you are, you've never talked, and he's not like already interested in you, he's probably not going to ask you out. So if there's a guy that you like and you want to ask him out, I think you probably won't even have to get to that point. If you just put yourself in his way and make yourself known to him, he will most likely ask you out if he's attracted to you and he thinks that you're fun and you guys hang out and have good rapport. I think that's more likely than not how you get out of this question anyway. But even if you get to that point where you want to ask him out, I don't think it's really a big deal. What I do think is a big deal is what he says here of, if he says generally you want to be the person being asked out, which I agree with, but he says if the guy just isn't making any moves, just go for it. Which to me, I understand what he's getting at, but I think if the guy isn't making any moves, that isn't necessarily a green flag on this guy's leadership ability going forward. Do you want to have to deal with that type of temperament moving forward after that? So if you like a guy and you're not seeing him make any moves and he's just stagnant with everything, I don't necessarily think that just defaulting to asking that guy out and pushing past that point is necessarily a good idea. I mean, if you think there's serious potential there, then yeah, knock yourself out. But I think that is a red flag, in my opinion, if the guy is unwilling, especially if you know that he likes you and you guys are friends and he actually knows who you are and he's not like asking you out. There's either two things there. Either he is scared to do it and it's a red flag, or he doesn't like you. Or he doesn't like you, which may be a harder thing to hear, but that's probably what it is. If he's not asking you out, it's one of those two. And obviously you want to have grace. I know each person is different when it comes to asking people out, and there's lots of different beliefs on how that's done. And can guys ask multiple people out without being a sinner and all this stuff? But I think generally speaking, if a guy's interested, he'll do something. There's got to be something done. And I think him not doing that is something that you should seriously consider as a woman if you're going to even remotely think about asking this guy out. Do you see other leadership qualities in this individual that would make you feel like if you asked him out and got past that point, that he would actually step up to the plate after that? Because asking someone out, at least in my mind, I know a lot of people feel differently, is extremely low stakes because nothing's there. The worst thing she can say is no, is what you always hear, which actually is not true. But I think, generally speaking, the worst thing she'll say is no, and you just move on. And there's nothing that you're really losing. Obviously, it hurts to be rejected. But I think there's nothing that you're like, there's no, backlog of, it's not like a breakup or whatever, where you're losing a connection with this person. It's just they're not interested in you in the same way. And that's okay. Move on to the next. So I think if he's not even able to do that, again, you got to start asking yourself some questions there. But yeah, we have a couple more questions that we're going to get to on our next episode, but that's going to wrap up today's. I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope I have cleared some things up for you, maybe. Maybe these are questions that you wanted to ask but didn't want to. Maybe you watched this video. I mean, they have a lot of subscribers, so chances are this came across your feed somewhere and you thought, oh, this is interesting. Let me know what you think. Do you think I'm off base? Do you think that these people are on base? Do you think that I'm, way off? Just let me know. Interact with me in the comments. I'm happy to hear what you guys have to say. Again, there will be a part 2 where we finish off the rest of the questions that I had noted out here. And again, the link for the video will be in the description, as well as a link to my previous episode. So go ahead and check both of those out. Make sure you give these guys a follow, because again, I have enjoyed interacting with them and watching their video. Apart from that, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you all on the next episode.